Traveling along here, whether this particular house existed at the time of the plantation or later the post-Civil War description, what it does show is a configuration that was by design aimed to allow a natural breeze to flow through the building. And an illustration on one of the placards points this out, so I'm not creating this, and nor am I original in my description, but you can see the breezeway here that travels from the waterfront, and these were the kitchen quarters, which were separate. Why were they separate? Because of course there was a wood stove and there was a lot of heat generated, and also, needless to say, there was the risk of fire. So if there was going to be a fire in the kitchen, it could be separate from the main quarters and thereby limit any damage. And at the time, and this is something that my children would have been at least exposed to at the village in Stone Mountain, but at the time, the people that worked in the kitchen would work in the kitchen all day long. They would be preparing meals all day long. Of course, they had only very, very basic things from which to cook and prepare. You know, your basic cutlery, and then as well fresh produce, no refrigeration of course, and basic ingredients, many of which they produced themselves, such as flour or that sort, maybe, but then a lot of local produce. Again, no refrigeration. So think about just how laborious, how complex it was, just preparing meals and feeding not only the staff, or rather not only the family of this plantation, but the hundreds of staff as well. One other matter to point out regarding the indigo is that these vats, which I may have shown, are not to scale. They are subscaled, and the placard here reads, "Indigo was grown at Fort George Islands between 1760 and the 1780s. During the British period, the vats and drying shed in the exhibit are models. They are not to scale. Vats were as large as 18 feet long by 18 feet wide. A steeper vat could hold 8,000 or 9,000 gallons of water. Vats were stepped down so the water could flow easily from one to the next." Now here's something as far as early matters of environmental consequences to point out, and maybe you can hear this. There's a big truck in the background. But making large quantities of indigo was bad for the environment. Planters reported water pollution, other crops were damaged, the mixture smelled disgusting and attracted hordes of flies and other insects. Planters located their houses away from the vats. Their families left home for fear of disease. Remember, we talked about yellow fever as an example. And believe me, these kinds of illnesses could kill, and they did, sometimes en masse. Even, for example, Savannah, Georgia, in the 1800s had a yellow fever epidemic. I know New Orleans did. The greatest toll was on the slaves. Not only was the heat, smell, and insects terrible, but exposure to the chemicals on the skin and in the lungs was deadly over time. So you can see some of the consequences of trying to process or produce this very prized dye called indigo.